Today we'll welcome Whitney McGruder, a lifelong storyteller, an editor, and mother with a deep love for stories. Whitney fell in love with writing and books since she was a child. Even as a young student, she dreamed of becoming both an author and a book editor. She has since then made it a reality. Her drive was never only about writing stories, but about actually living among stories, helping them become reality. As she's living the dream, Whitney doesn't sugarcoat the challenges of writing, editing, or marketing books. She openly talks about battling imposter syndrome, dealing with writer's block, and learning to manage deadlines realistically. She also believes deeply in resilience, personal growth, and redefining success in your own terms. And today we say, welcome to Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. Hello, Whitney. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm excited that we can finally have this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me, Whitney, how did it start? What made you decide to become a writer?
I decided to be a writer at a really young age. Even as like a small child, I really enjoyed when, I got to have any sort of writing assignment at school or reading assignment. I just really connected well with stories and with books. And I remember even in elementary school, I thought that I wanted to emulate some of my favorite authors and be an author someday. I did learn that a lot of my favorite authors were not necessarily full-time authors, but maybe they were teachers or scientists or librarians. Like they had another job and they wrote books. And so I still knew at a young age I wanted to write books, but I knew that I should probably have another job or alias as well. And so I also decided I wanted to be a book editor as a kid as well, because I thought, I just love books and I just want to be around as many of them as possible.
And you always have an infinite amount of inspiration in case you want to work on something.
Absolutely.
Especially if your work is basically know what's wrong with a book. I mean, it will give you a better result in your work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even better, just as a book editor, I learned that it's not just necessarily finding what's wrong with books, but also what's going really well and drawing that out of the author of maybe, for example, they're really good at dialogue and asking for more dialogue of, yeah, like for example, maybe there's a scene where they're saying, yeah, and then I went and told my friend that it what just happened to me. And it's like, well, how about we change that scene so we actually hear how the character describes what just happened, whether it was good, bad, or something else, right? And so, yeah, a lot of it is finding what's good. Like, why do we need this book? And let's bring more of it out of the author. Sometimes when you're stuck with your own story for so long, it's hard to know what's working well and what's not. So I learned early on the power of like, yeah, drawing that out of, no, you're really good at this. Keep going, right? We want to see more of this.
Yeah, it really, some encouragement is necessary for any of us that is dealing with editors, especially
Absolutely.
because it's so tiring sometimes to remake and remake and remake things.
Yes. And I learned this especially from my husband. We actually met as teenagers. We were both aspiring authors at the time. So we would, as teenagers, exchange manuscripts. And this was before Pinterest, before social media, before even really Google Drive. So we would email each other our chapters. And I really admired that even as a teenager, he found ways of telling me rather than saying things that were a bit maybe like crass or unhelpful, like, oh, this is boring or this is cringe. We're both teenagers, so of course we're going to write a little bit of cringe here. But I remember early on saying, or hearing him say, yeah, it's a little maybe repetitive, or maybe it's a little this or that. But what if you did this? It felt more motivating and especially since we were friends and crushing on each other, it felt nice to hear that my crush thought that my writing was good. So
That's so sweet.
yeah,
Is he an editor too?
yes, he is. Yeah, we are both professional editors now, and so yeah, he's still helping me with my books, but he's helping others with theirs as well.
Oh, you went to college together.
Yes, yeah. We are both from military families, and so it was pretty serendipitous that we were stationed in the same place, became friends, and then, yeah, decided we wanted to remain in each other's lives. And so we applied to the same colleges and we both studied English and editing together. Very nerdy, very romantic. Yeah.
Yeah, actually it is.
Yeah.
So, how many books have you finished right now?
So I have published three books and I'm working on my fourth book right now. I published my first book in 2018. That's I essentially had a very long manuscript and split it into a duology. So I published the first part in 2018, the second part in 2020. Now working on another duology, different world, different genre, different audience, and so yeah. Now I'm working on you know wrapping up the second duology. And so, again, I wanted to be a published author for so long, and so it really meant a lot to finally be published in 2018. I initially wanted to be traditionally published, and then after being on social media, querying, not really getting any connections with any literary agents, and instead making friends with other indie authors, I started creating this community, and they were just very supportive, answering any questions I had. And so in 2018, I decided, well, I really want to be a published author. So I guess if you want it done, you do it yourself. So it was a really wonderful moment to say that not only was I a published author, but I got myself there. It was a really, I sometimes forget how big of a deal that is. But yeah, I think that was, it was definitely good enough that I wanted to keep publishing books, keep writing, keep working on them. So,
What tell you that it was the time to become a published author?
well, I think it came down to the timing. I think if your listeners are traditionally published or want to be traditionally published, they know that it's not always up to you when your books come out. And I remember telling my friends or my family that I want to be published and that my book is done. It's been edited for the upteenth time. It just needs a publisher. And at the time, it really felt like I think everyone's plan A at the time, and maybe still, is to be traditionally published because that's what we know or we're the most familiar with. And then after querying for a year, which I think is a short and long amount of time, depending on how excited you are to publish, I decided, well, because of my English and editing degrees, my education, and also my connections with traditionally published, indie published, and hybrid published authors, I decided I wanted to look into, when could I get published if I did it on my own? What did I need to know? And so I did a lot of research. I specifically went on, blogging was really big at the time. So I went on other authors' blogs and looked at their experiences, the things that worked for them, what didn't work for them. And then I set up my own publishing plan. I'm very lucky to be married to an editor, and so that helped with the editing costs.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford his rates at the time, and so I think we got something from like his wish list, something that was still very nice, but definitely not the same as hiring a professional editor. But I was able to budget, get a cover designer, illustrator. It just felt good knowing that I could say my book would come out in 2018 because I essentially knew how to do it, and I knew that I had the authority to do so. I didn't have to necessarily wait for a literary agent or a publisher to say, you're chosen, you get to be a published author now, right? It's still very competitive. It's still very, yeah, I'd say it's still very competitive to be published with a traditional publisher, like the major publishers, New York City, for American authors, right? And so it was a very good feeling. I like every year I would put on my New Year's resolutions that I would publish my book. And it's kind of hard to fulfill that wish or that goal when it's a waiting game. And I still don't begrudge anyone for wanting to be traditionally published. That was just my path. I you know, starting this book, my Destiny Seeker duology. I technically started that in 2004. And so when 2018 rolled around, I was like, I really want to be
Oh,
done with this book.
so this duology is the one that practically started your relationship with your husband.
Yeah, yeah. He was there for the whole journey. And so, yeah, it was definitely a yeah, I've done my waiting. I like was very patient and that also there comes a time when with any project where you've rewritten it, you've edited it to to the end. It's like there's nothing more that can be done. You just got to be done. So and so by that point, yeah, I'd reached that. Yeah.
That's the issue. There's always something. One needs to learn when to stop. And I will
Yes.
say that because really, the more you read your thing and find errors or something, always new will come.
Yes.
And not because you did a bad job. It's just because that's how we are. We get
Yeah.
anxious and overthink.
And if it's your first book, you really want to establish, this is my genre, this is my writing style, this is what you can expect from me in the future. And so it's very understandable and I would say very healthy to want your first book to be of high quality and a great experience. And so for the author and the reader, of course. And so yeah, by that point, I yeah, self-publishing became an opportunity for me to really say, I'm done with this series. I'm so relieved. I can now work on something else.
Honestly, that's one of the reasons why I think it's better to have an editor and not edit your own books because the anxiety, the issues, honestly, for me at least, it's bad for my mental health.
Yeah, and I think it's more motivating to have another pair of eyes, especially, professional, to really make sure that the structure is there, but also the unique things that you're trying to bring to this book, or really just to books in general, that they're actually shining through. Yeah, and I think when I'll speak from my own experience, if I'm stuck in my own head, I can almost talk myself out of even publishing the book. It's almost always never that serious. I think we compare ourselves, especially in the editing phase, we compare ourselves with already polished books that we know and we love, and it's not actually helping. It doesn't make you a better author to compare yourself and to beat yourself up. It's a relief, and I would say it's a win-win situation to work with another editor. I mean, of course, I work with my husband, but I also work with early readers or sensitivity readers to really ensure that, like especially the books that I'm working on now, yeah, that they're actually enjoyable. And if they're not, what can I do about it? Yeah. And
Mm,
sensitivity readers, they are, I don't know if you or your audience are familiar, but they're more like,
I know
it's not
what is.
okay, yeah. So I've been working more and more with them where they're not quite editors, but more, I would say more specialized than just an early reader or an ARC reader, right? Adding more people to the team is always a win-win to make sure that the book is going well and also that, like you said, you're attending to your own mental health. It's like the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, like it takes a team to publish a book.
Yeah. So, did you get inspired by the work of any other author, movie, or game when you made your duology?
Yes, when I did my first duology, Destiny Seeker series, I was heavily inspired by this is very nerdy, but it was very inspired by a TV movie. Not quite sure what it is. I would say it's more like a TV series called The Tenth Kingdom, and uh, it's very early rendition of fractured or yeah, fractured fairy tales or retelling of you have a Snow White character and you've got a big bad wolf and you have uh dwarves and elves and you've got all these fantasy elements, but in a modern setting. Like the characters come from New York City to this, like fairy tale world. And it's to me, I still watch it and I still enjoy it. But I remember my book initially started out as fan fiction, And then I realized I had ideas beyond the fan fiction. I had my own characters coming to mind. And so, yeah, I was very inspired by,
Many modern books
yeah,
are like that. I mean,
yes.
just look at 50 Shades of Grey
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be our most famous example. I would
of
say,
fanfiction turned real.
yeah, I would say, what's that book called? I think Love Hypothesis is another example. It's Star Wars fan fiction, like Kylo Ren and Rey from Star Wars. That's how it initially started. And
Oh, I
so I
didn't
think
know
if
that.
readers are fam yeah, I think if you know that, the story or like the character descriptions will start to like line up a bit. Hopefully I'm getting the book title correct. But yes, I think that's very common for writers to be inspired by characters, world building, or even tropes, and then just add their own spin to it. And so Destiny Seeker was an opportunity to take all of these fairy tale folklore tropes that I loved from not just from that show, The Tenth Kingdom, but also Grimm fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen. I started reading at 1001 Arabian Nights. I was very curious about different folklore tropes from around the world. And I'm still very fascinated by fairy tales and folklore. And so that was an opportunity, like especially as a young author, to put in my favorite kinds of characters, but also, still focus on, well, how am I contributing? What am I adding that's new or interesting? So I would say like a common example is that, especially at that age, I was reading a lot of books that had like the chosen one. Like I think Harry Potter is kind of this example of like he was, born under unique circumstances, orphaned under, and very traumatic circumstances, and
Yeah,
he's the chosen one. He's going to be mentored and raised up to fight the big bad guy,
in the
right? And my
2000s, that's what's very common actually.
yeah, and I would say, my books are that series. I leaned more on Frodo and Sam, where they have this huge task, but they carry it together, and they essentially choose that, like they're not the chosen one. They choose to, take the ring to Mordor, and so my characters are the same thing, where they're not necessarily forced to, be the heroes of the story, but they see, we want to, or we want to learn how to, we want to help. And so they carry that burden together. And so I think that's a pretty typical approach to fantasy, especially is the chosen one or the hero's journey. And so I try to find little ways to, yeah, to play with that.
There are
Yeah.
many interesting spins on the chosen one trope recently that I have saw. That honestly, it's had become something completely different at this point.
Yeah, what's an example that comes to mind? I'm curious.
Yeah, for example, I remember seeing this story about this couple that they receive a prophecy that their son will end this mythical war, but when they receive it, they weren't happy. They actually were horrified because their son will have to live a horrible life just to save the world. And then the parents got inspired by that and decided to join the conflict to fix that before their child is born
I
into the
love that.
world.
Yeah. As you're explaining that, that seemed very kind of similar to a lot of Greek mythology stories where there's a lot of prophecies and the characters or the even historical figures, they're trying to change fate. But a lot of times the moral of the story is you can't change fate. They're destined or doomed in many cases to do a certain thing. And so I like how you're describing the parents doing what they could to not just alleviate their son's life, but like their own lives or the lives of future people. I feel like that's they're it's yeah, it's that they're not the chosen one or they're not giving birth to the chosen one. They're picking up the mantle of taking responsibility. And I think we see with a lot of stories that, or I think just with a lot of messages that we're trying to share with readers, is that everyone can make a difference to improve circumstances or the future at large. It doesn't have to be you have a super secret power that no one else has and only you can use it. It's everyone has the ability to make a difference. It's just a matter of if they're willing to make that sacrifice or willing to stand up in their own small but significant way.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
very hopeful. We could always use a little bit of hope when we're reading books right now. So
So tell me, do you have any advice for new writers starting right now?
yes. So we were talking earlier about creating teams or addressing author mental health. And I would say that a great way to address those is to start networking right now. And networking can just be making other author friends, whether it's the same genre, the same publishing path. It can just even be you're on the same journey. You're both wanting to be debut authors, or you're both wanting to write a sequel, right? But it's never too early to start sharing your journey with others and making these connections. And I say that because writing can be lonely. You can be stuck in your own head of whether it's imposter syndrome, perfectionism. And I have found that by talking to other authors, asking them questions, and also being ready to help however I can, this, give and take sort of friendship or group setting, I have found that I'm actually able to finish a book or actually able to publish a book. And it's so important, especially if you are choosing to be self-published, because you you get to set the schedule. You get to pull the trigger and publish your book. And it's so nice to have other people with you that you can lean on. And I think it also helps with the overall perspective of what it means to be an author. I think especially as a kid, I didn't really know a lot about the publishing world, but I thought that like other industries that it's very competitive of, only certain people get to be published or only certain people get to be bestsellers, that it came from a place of competition or lack. But in reality, I see publishing now as we are all taking turns being in the spotlight. And that me being in the spotlight doesn't take from your spotlight and vice versa. It's kind of like we all have birthdays. So we all have a special day or a special dinner, right? To celebrate
Yeah.
us. And just because I have a birthday doesn't mean that you can't have a birthday party, right? And so that's sort of my metaphor for book publishing. And so I don't know. Book publishing can be more fun when you are celebrating that your friend has published their recent book. Even if you're in the trenches when you're editing, it's like, okay, my turn is just around the corner. This other person is just a little bit ahead of me or a little bit behind me, but that doesn't detract from your success, from your book, from your skills. Because even if you have friends that are in the same genre, you technically have different audiences. We could both be writing fantasy, but we have different readers or like reader expectations in mind. Whether your readers are expecting more world building, maybe my readers are expecting more character development or, like certain kind of tropes, things like that. And so, yeah, all in all, other authors are your community, your friends, your colleagues, your peers, right? They're not necessarily your competition. And so the sooner you start making
Realize
those friends,
this?
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the sooner it will be more fun or more fulfilling.
Yeah. So tell me, did you have any hobby or something that helped you in your process?
Yes. So early on, and this was before, again, I feel kind of old saying this, but this was before definitely before Pinterest or before you could use technology to create character art. But as a kid, I would draw my characters, especially if they're, in a fantasy setting and they have, certain outfits or certain appearances. I like to draw as a kid, and so I would draw my main characters, and that would help with character description, or at least just keeping straight, who has blonde hair, who has red hair, right? I think that can sometimes be an early blunder of like, wait a second, I thought that they were wearing silver earrings, but now they're gold? Question mark. Like it's a sort of like an editing thing. But yeah, drawing was a great hobby, and let's see other hobbies that help with writing I would say just like listening, enjoying music. I feel like was another hobby that helped of just helping me focus. I think a lot of authors, like putting together playlists of, this playlist is a good indication of what my character would listen to, what they would like, or I would make playlists that helped me sit in the world building. So a lot of like movie scores or even like video game scores that matched the vibe or aesthetic of my world. And so I'd say like music and drawing are those hobbies.
Wow. At least you have had some stuff that will help you on your journey. So,
Yes.
but by the way, do you do your own marketing or do you have someone for that?
I did my own marketing. I was very fortunate that I learned through my editing minor as well as my first job out of college how to do marketing. I had a very helpful professor who was a freelance editor, and she was very practical and pragmatic in her teachings, where she, at that point, she told us, I think you have an understanding of how to follow a style guide or how to look for grammar mistakes, but how do you actually find clients? How do you actually make money from doing this? And, she was drawing from her experience as being 100% freelance for several years. And so I was taking furious notes during those kind of classes. And then I worked for an SEO marketing company soon after. And so I would essentially take the skills or like the behind the scenes knowledge of like how to build a website, how do you effectively use hashtags, those sort of things, and applied it to my early works. And yeah, and now I technically do my own marketing by attending book events. So I'm talking to people in person about my books. And so I think that takes a different set of skills. So of just how do you encapsulate everything about your books in a succinct way so that people can listen to you, look at the books themselves, and decide if they want to buy the books then and there. So
Then you have an advantage because many writers are not really social, so that's always a problem.
yeah,
In internet, it might be okay because you are in the security of your home. But the moment
yeah.
you're like making signings, going to promote your book on Walmart or whatever, it can be nerve breaking. Sitting there, understand that no one is stopping for you. I have heard stories of people that are completely wrecked by those situations.
Yeah, they can be, I think, intimidating for anyone just because these books are so meaningful to you. You wrote them. It's almost similar to having your own children. They came from you. And so it's almost like, don't call my baby ugly, or like, why don't you value these books the way I do? It can be, I think, even if you're extroverted, it can still be draining of just how do I talk to these strangers and have a good experience. Um, I I have learned over the years by doing it and also by working with other authors that it's not necessarily convincing people to read your book. It's just, I wrote this book for this kind of reader. If that's you, the book costs 16, 17, $18. This is where you can get it and enjoy. Please leave a review, right? I found it takes a lot of pressure off if you're looking at it as I am communicating with my perfect, ideal, intended reader. Everyone else is just extra credit because I think you and I know that we all have our favorite genres, our least favorite genres, and so if someone's talking to me, for example, about a horror book, I'm not a big fan of horror myself, but I know someone who is, so I may be listening and thinking, well, my husband Travis, he likes, paranormal thrillers, horror, psychological thrillers, and so I may buy the book for him. But if it's for me, I'm thinking, oh no, thank you. I'm not your reader. I'm not your person, but I know many people who are, right? And so, yeah, that's a big thing that I have learned with marketing is just really narrowing my scope. I'm not trying to convince everyone or even just people who aren't big readers. I'm looking for people who love to read and love to read fantasy.
Yeah. Um, Tell me, did you ever think this would be your life when you were a teenager, starting your draft, etc.?
Yeah, that's such a great question, just because I think as a kid, I wasn't really thinking big picture of, where would I be in 10, 20, 30 years. I was just thinking, I think I pictured myself doing a book signing, and I think that that's pretty typical of kids. And I think also as a kid, I knew what I wanted to go for. I just didn't know if I would succeed. But I definitely knew I wanted to be an author, I wanted to be an editor. And so that guided me through my experience going through high school and college of what classes, what clubs, what did I need to do to get to that point. I know not every person starts out thinking I'm going to be an author, I'm going to specifically write these stories. But yeah, I don't know. It's really kind of interesting to think. I don't think I expected this to be my life, but I'm glad that it is. I think I've made like the younger author version of me very proud of just sticking with it. Publishing one book is already a big deal, and it should be a big deal. But the fact that I'm on number four is like that's not that's not very typical statistically. Most people, if they even write, they never finish. And so if anyone is listening and they've at least finished a manuscript, you're already in a small group of people. That's not very typical to see a story to the page that says the end, right? And so yeah,
Even if it gets
yeah.
later on editing hell, you at least finish that milestone.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it can be very intimidating, especially if it's not what you studied. And I want to clarify, you do not have to have a degree like mine to be an author. You don't have to be a certain age or a certain privilege. And I think that's what indie publishing has really shown me is that the doors of publishing are wider than ever, where different kinds of stories or just different kinds of perspectives are allowed to be on the shelf now. It does come with more marketing to establish yourself as, of establish yourself as a published author, but also just to put a spotlight on your book when there's a spotlight on a lot of books at any given point. It's sort of I'm not quite sure what the word is, but maybe it's ironic to say, it's so rare to be published, but yet thousands of books get published every month, every year, right? It's both are true essentially, even though it feels contradictory. And so, yeah, I also have seen with traditional publishing that they're never going to quite catch up with what readers are actually looking for, just because readers are always thinking, what's unique, what's interesting, what's fresh, right? And a lot of publishers are looking for books that um, will essentially replicate what other successful books have done. So, if a particular trope, for example, is really popular, they want to publish more books like that. I think, for example, when Twilight was coming out, when the Hunger Games were coming out, a lot of other series were coming out because they were
Teenage, the bunch of teenage dystopian fantasies. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I think right now, romance is having a renaissance. I would say a lot of people are returning to reading, and a lot of them are returning because of series like ACOTAR, this, again, like paranormal romance, or, just different levels of romance. So, yeah, so publishers are trying to latch onto trends or be a trendsetter when um, there's still so many kind of readers who are thinking, okay, well, that was great, but what's next, right? I think we see this with music and with movies as well of, instead of like the fifth or sixth movie in a series, why not something that is a completely fresh take um, on the industry or on storytelling, right? And so, like I think Sinners right now is a great example of that. Like it's a very unique story. It's highly acclaimed. It's really showing that people are looking for a fresh take on um, all different kinds of storytelling when it comes to film, when it comes to movies, as opposed to a remake or a live action version of, or the fifth, sixth, seventh movie in a series. And so I think readers are always looking for something new. And I think you're going to find that in the indie world just because more people are free to share their stories. I think just like a quick example, I was talking to an author this week, and I do a lot of consulting work for my full-time job as well as like my part-time job. I have a lot of different jobs. A lot of it is author coaching related. And this author is working on a book that was essentially taking aspects of mythology and folklore from South Asian culture. He's from India, and coupling it with sci-fi. And I was immediately like, I want to read this book right now. Like, I'm not even a big sci-fi fan, but I was already picturing like, what would it look like to have sci-fi essentially, like Indian or South Asian folklore, religion, like their like different
Honestly,
cultural
it
touchstones.
matched
Yeah,
very well. If you
yeah,
haven't read some of the stories on that mythology, and it's wow. I mean, I think it's the most
yeah,
exaggerated of all in the world. So I can completely picture it as sci-fi.
yeah. I think it's definitely something that I was personally like I haven't personally seen it. Again, I'm not as plugged into the sci-fi, what's coming out or what is considered classics in that genre. I think I'm most familiar when it comes to sci-fi. I'm thinking of Star Wars or Star Trek, right? And I think a lot of people who have a basic understanding of that genre, they're thinking of that, or maybe even like what is it, Ender's Game, like those kind of classics. And so, yeah, but to me, I was thinking that's very interesting, and I'd love to hear, how like what his take is. I haven't seen his writing yet, but I was immediately intrigued just because it felt like to me two things that yes, like you said, like they can and should go together. I just don't see it as often. And I think every genre is having a similar thing of, you know, different character representation or different cultural representation of, we're used to maybe seeing white blonde superheroes, but what if they are Native American, or what if they're Black, or what if they, are disabled, or, have, other life experiences that we don't typically see. Doesn't mean that they don't exist in the publishing world. They just need more of a spotlight, like I was mentioning earlier. Like we all have that opportunity to have a spotlight, and some, you know, need a little bit more. That way, we're all aware, you know, and it's also tough to know that I will probably never read all these stories, but it's nice to know they exist, and they can be on my TBR until I'm ready to get to them.
So tell me, Whitney, what did you struggle the most with at the start?
At the start, I would say that's a good question. I would say at the start, I think it would just be that imposter syndrome. Again, I was comparing myself to all my favorite authors, and logically, I knew that they had an editing team, or they had, or maybe maybe they'd gone to more conferences or more classes than me. And I'm also at my earliest, I was a teenager, and so I was thinking I'm comparing myself with adults, right? That's not very helpful to do. And I wasn't really reading books by other teenagers. And so I wasn't knowing I didn't really know like what that looked like. So I would focus on my book, but I was so overcome with imposter syndrome that I wouldn't tell my friends that I was working on anything, or I wouldn't share any of my writing. And yeah, I don't think the imposter syndrome made me a better writer. It just was almost like a unwanted companion over my shoulder saying, oh, that's cheesy, or that's boring, or that's too much, or that's not enough, right? So I really struggled with that. And once I started sharing my work with my friend at the time, husband now, that started to go away a little bit of maybe if I was struggling, I could at least think, well, I got Travis's opinion on it, and he said that maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. Or maybe it is, but I at least know how to fix it, right? Or it's way better than I think, and I should leave it alone, move on to the next chapter. And so the imposter syndrome was huge. And
Yeah.
just like with editing, I think there comes a point where you can go to every conference, you can go to every, you can be in every writers group, you can, yeah, you can go to school and get this education. Like you can read every book about writing, every like advice book ever about writing or marketing or what have you. And you'll just reach a breaking point of, is this actually helping or is it just holding me back or making this a little bit more complicated than it has to be, right? Well, I have to understand everything about story structure and I have to follow this formula or else dot, 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 right? And so whether you are worried about your education or your experience, I think there's a lot of pressure, especially now. There's so much competition, or at least it can feel like
Yeah.
there's so much competition that, again, like talking back to your imposter syndrome, I think will help of just what is the actual state of the book? Is it good? Is it not? And let's move forward rather than feeling like this has to be 100% perfect or else it should not see the light of day. That's
Yeah.
yeah. It's I think we can look back on classic books and find typos or just find plot holes or other mistakes that just made it to print. And I don't think I think to that point there's not really like a perfect book. I could be wrong, but I also don't think that that's the point of writing. I don't think that's the point is to make the most perfect book ever. I think the point is to write a story that is meaningful to you. It's entertaining to you. It's what you want to see on the shelf. And the editing is just to make sure that other people are going to enjoy it as well, right? That at least you and your community will, um, be immersed in the story and be entertained or find comfort or find, enjoyment as they're reading your book. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, did you do anything in particular when you were under a block or something?
Oh, like a writer's block? I mean, I've had writer's block and I've had editor's block too, of just I'm not feeling creative or I'm not feeling motivated. And I think some things that I think something that's very like short term, if it's sort of a smaller writer's block, is that I will talk to other people. Like I will talk out the problem of, okay, so my characters, they're at, I have this fight scene, and then I know I want to get to this point. It's just the middle part. I just don't know what to do. And sometimes talking it out, I will give myself the answer. And I call this like monologuing. I will monologue to my husband, and then I'll be like, oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much. It's kind of like a comedic scene where it's like, thanks for your help. And he has said nothing. He's just a sounding board.
Mm.
And so that can be very helpful. Or, I mean, I definitely ask him for help with certain aspects of fantasy writing that are just not my strong suit. For example, in my second book, Destiny Seeker, the Defender, I have this like fantasy battle war scene. And Travis loves strategy. He loves games like Risk. He plays Warhammer 4K, 40K, sorry. And so he loves strategy and he's good at, you know, um, like playing these games or understanding the rules of combat. And so I asked him to basically like create this battle of like, okay, this side does this, what does the other side do in retaliation, and what does that look like on the battle map so that I can write it down, you know? And so those are just some ways to get out of like those small ruts. I would say for things that are a bit more long term, like say you're having a writer's block that lasts several weeks, months, could be a year. All of those different levels are, I think, normal, just because real life happens. That it usually means that it's time for me to let myself take a break and focus on whatever else is on my plate, whether it's stress from work or Maybe there's a relationship that just needs more attention. Maybe I'm sick. Um, or maybe I have other mental health struggles, or maybe it's just the news is really awful and I need to grieve or journal or something else. I found that if I let myself take a break and take care of other things, then I can come back and feel better about it and not beat myself up about it. With indie publishing, I have the power to say my book is going to be delayed or it's going to be published sooner. I have the power over my timeline. And so I can say, okay, I won't be finished with the editing in March. Like I literally, this is a real life example. Like I really want to be done in March. It's still May and I'm not done. But I have the power to say, I'm not behind. I'm just shifting everything. And I'm saying this from a very logical standpoint. I know emotionally it can feel very devastating. And
Honestly, I feel that a good deadline is a very necessary thing because with
yes,
deadlines, at least, even if they're not real, even if they were just self-made or something, having someone telling you, finish this in, I don't know, July is a great way to keep track of
exactly.
how you do things. Because otherwise, if you just go free with your life, at
Hmm.
least for me, I can't. I will
Yeah.
just procrastinate.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on something that's so important that I try to tell myself, I try to apply my own advice, but I tell other people is being an author means being very self-aware of how do you approach deadlines? How do you realistically approach writing? Like, how long does it realistically take you to write your first draft? For some people, that could take a month. For some people, it may take a year. For some people, like me, it could take almost a decade, right? It it's really dependent on, yeah, your circumstances or just how you operate as a writer. And so I think just being true to yourself and knowing yourself, that is what's going to help you with things like deadlines. Like when I said I wanted to be done in March, that was very unrealistic because I didn't have the habit set up of every day I'm going to work on a chapter or every day I'm going to work on five or however many I could reasonably do. It still hung over me, but I was not making the time for it. And now that I am, I'm going to have a more realistic deadline. And so I think writer's block can sometimes come from that of, well, I want to be done so that I can query or that I can pass this to my editor. And sometimes we can add that extra pressure on ourselves and have that fight or flight or freeze. And I think writer's block is a freeze of, I really want to work on my book, but I'm just not. And you may know why or you may not know why, but yeah, I think being realistic and being true to yourself is what's going to help ultimately with writer's block of it's almost like being your own therapist of, yeah, why is this a struggle? Like, can you actually describe like what's happening? Is this a mechanical thing? Is this a imposter syndrome thing? Is this you have a bajillion other things to do and this isn't realistic right now, you know? And if you can answer that question, I think it's going to help at least know how to get out of it.
Yeah. So, moving on to another topic, thank you so much.
Yeah,
That was a great advice. Can you tell us a bit about your books?
sure. Yeah. So I'm a fantasy author, and at least for now, who knows, I may genre switch.
Do
Um,
you want to try other things?
yeah, I want to. I feel like I want to write some. Well, I definitely want to write a book that is just about book marketing or book publishing. Just, I think I have so much blog content that could be turned into a book. And so that would be more like a nonfiction approach of sharing stats, sharing research, experience on
Even a
book
memoir.
marketing. Yeah, even a memoir, right? And I also have some interesting family history stories that haven't been written down. So I may or may not publish that on a large scale, but I would love to write essentially a biography of my great grandparents and just how their decisions have affected my family and all the ways that family history can affect us. Yeah, who knows? But for now, I'm a fantasy author. Right now, I enjoy making things up as I go. And so my first duology, that is a epic YA fantasy. Epic meaning that it's sort of drawn out. It's a little bit more episodic of what are we going to face today? What are we going to overcome today? Very similar to Lord of the Rings, where Sam and Frodo is like, meanwhile, we're in a forest or we're in a bog or we are coming across a big giant spider, right? And Destiny Seeker series that follows my two main characters, Ilse and Rejma. They come from a place that is isolated. There is a magical wall that keeps everyone out and keeps them in. Part of the problem is that it happened, like the wall, essentially appeared one day when they were very young, and no one really knows the truth behind it. And so they're always very curious about why it's there and if it'll ever be broken. They find a way to actually pass through the wall and to essentially discover the world at large. And their goal is to free their people so they can travel. They can, like Ilse, she was separated from her mom. Like she was on the other side of this wall when it happened. And so it's ultimately like it's very akin to the Berlin Wall, how it just cut through the country, right? And so, or just other major walls or barriers throughout history that they just cut through rather unfairly or just rather sudden. And so they want to free their family and get to the bottom of things. And so a lot of it is them learning about a world that they had never seen of. Like their family has very partial memories of what's on the other side. That's like being stuck in your home country and not knowing anything about, like, say, China or Russia. It's like, I don't know. I know it exists, but I couldn't tell you anything about it, right? Again, it's a story that has a lot of fantasy elements, folklore. As a kid, I just wanted to put all my favorite things. So there are dragons, there's elemental magic, there are witches, spooky forests, all those sort of things. So yeah. So that is the first duology. I highly recommend it for readers who are, teenagers or older who just love a good adventure series and just all those, who just love those fantasy elements. The duology that I'm working on now it's a new adult romantasy series. Romantasy, it's sort of a newer genre. It's taking elements of fantasy and romance and meshing them together.
I think that's always existed.
I think it's become, I think it's always existed, but I think it's been used more for marketing purposes, like using romantasy instead of just romance or fantasy. At least whenever I type it, Microsoft Word thinks it's not a word. So I struggle with that. They think, oh, you want to say romantic? No.
I guess it's not popular enough at the term, I mean.
Perhaps, yeah. But I'm working on a romantasy duology, and this series focuses, it's more character focused. So it focuses on Queen Anjali, and she starts out, she's already married, she's already a queen, she already has 2 children. And I wanted to have a series specifically for my friends who are already parents and love to read. And there are not very many fantasy characters who are parents or have parents.
Yeah,
I think
usually fantasy, it's I think the target audience for fantasy lately it's teenagers or young adults. So it's rare to focus on a full-blown adults.
Yeah, or just to even wonder, what kind of adventures can happen after you're essentially an established adult, right? And as someone in my 30s, I know there's still plenty of ups and downs. You don't have to necessarily frame a story around a coming of age story. There's always something to learn, or there are always ways to evolve as a human being. And so my main character, she's checked all the boxes, and at the beginning of my book called The Throwaway Queen, She is on her way to visit her family. She's on a bit of maternity leave, I guess so to say, uh, as much maternity leave as a queen can have, right? She's going to go visit her family, and while she's going from one kingdom to another, she survives an assassination attempt. The rest of her party does not make it, and she survives in the woods. Another group of people actually find her and essentially like bring her back to health. They protect her, and she is ready to return home, thinking, I'm a hero. I survived, and it's been enough time that when she returns home, she discovers that her husband, the king, has remarried someone else because he thought that she passed away. And so a lot of it is the drama of, what do you do if you thought your spouse was dead and they're not, and now you have two different spouses? Do and I think most people, if they had that choice of, do I divorce the first one or the second one, or if you're the person who didn't do anything wrong, it's like, what do we do? And there are children involved, right? And so it's not just like an easy life decision to make, right? And so a lot of it is more relationship driven and more like conversationally driven. There's not as much like magic or quests or things like that. I think my characters had enough of that. She's like, I'm done. I just want to relax. But yeah, a lot of it is just, yeah, what would you do with that situation? And something that I wanted to also introduce was that uh, this this series is a lot shorter because my main character, she still wants to get to the bottom of, who tried to murder her, get to the bottom of that. And she has a similar approach to me of I could wait for someone else to solve this, or I could figure it out myself. And the sort of twist in this genre is rather than her and this other queen essentially like fighting or being enemies, they actually both work together to figure out who this enemy is. The other queen is very, very empathetic to the situation of like, I can't believe someone would do that to you. And they could do that to me because I'm a queen now. So it's like, let's get to the bottom of this. And so right now I'm working on the sequel to that novel. It's called The Vindicated Queen.
It's an
And
interesting spin
yeah,
because honestly, in those situations, usually because most girls at that time just get married to authority figures because of family pressure. So
yeah,
mostly when confronted in this kind of setting, they usually, oh no, if my family learns about this, they'll get rid of me or something. So they take an
yeah.
antagonistic role just to survive.
Yeah, I think we see this a lot in a lot of court intrigue, or even just stories that involve royal families. I think Game of Thrones is a pretty brutal example of, the female characters are very fierce because, yeah, they don't really live in a forgiving, equitable world. It's kill or be killed, or, assert a dominance or be dominated, right? And there are a lot of very sexist characters in that show as well. And I wanted to create a little bit more of I wanted to focus on that struggle a bit more rather than it just being an easy, well, the king just snaps his fingers and my main character is out of the picture. Or he says, oh, well, I'll just get rid of the second wife and everything is fine, right? I wanted to introduce a set of adults that have a lot of responsibility, have a lot of pressure, but there's no necessarily, besides this assassin, there are no real like truly evil people. Like I didn't necessarily want this to be like, well, let's hate this king character because he remarried. Like I was thinking, if my spouse passed away and I had kids, I would want to remarry and essentially, try to move forward, make sure that my kids had, two parents or, that sort of, he goes on his own healing journey. I didn't necessarily want it to be like yeah, let's hate this guy because he didn't know, especially when
And in
No
most
one else in the party
situations of
made it.
royalty,
Yeah.
and in most situations of royalty, it's not even a choice. Usually, when a queen, it's not when a prince or a king doesn't have a queen. They're just kind of forced it on him.
Yeah. And when I was initially developing the story and outlining, I thought, I I can literally write whatever I want. I can do something different. I may have terms like king, queen, prince, princess, but I can create a different structure or different like cultural touchstones in these countries that don't necessarily have to follow especially like a Western view of royalty. Because I think a lot of fantasy draws from like just like what we know about like the British monarchy or Scandinavian monarchy. It's very like Western, European, that sort of that's usually the well that we draw from. And when I was working on this back in 2021, of I can I can do whatever I want. I mean, I still have to fill my plot holes, but I can essentially introduce my readers to a different kind of monarchy where there's just different rules or different traditions to follow. They may be somewhat familiar, but it may be more inclusive, or there may be like other problems or other issues to address. So
Yeah.
yeah, I also wanted to create a world that I will actually want to visit. Like I'm in this world all the time, but if this was to ever be a real place of I would love to be a visitor or live there, right? I think I'm drawing on this old meme that I saw where it was fans saying, oh, I would love to go to Narnia or I'd love to go to Hogwarts, and then the fans of Hunger Games are responding with, no thanks, I don't want to go there.
I saw that meme.
Yeah, I'm good. Never mind. Don't pick
Like,
me.
yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I would say, yeah.
I wouldn't pick Hogwarts, by the way, because honestly, the child mortality on that series is wow.
Right. And I think luckily we have lots of books that have magical schools or just modern approaches to wizards, witchcraft, and the like. So there's definitely something for everyone. Different worlds or different, again, like cultures or structures. Yeah, doesn't have to be the same five, right?
Um, so tell me, do you have a story of how you named your books?
Yeah, I think a lot of times I come up with almost like nicknames for my books, and then I just keep using them, and I'm like, I can't think of any other title to go with that. And that was definitely how the Throwaway Queen got its name. Was I and I call it TQ for short, but it was just like I think one of the early, like, if not the first draft, I just wrote the Throwaway Queen just to give it a title instead of calling it my work in progress or WIP, right? And I just
It
it
just
just grew
stuck.
on me. Yeah. I also find that I mean, I know that the blank queen or the queen of blank and blank, that can be a very common title structure, but I felt like the word throwaway was a little intriguing of who's throwing her away and what makes her discardable, right? And it relates to this fact that I mean, she comes to terms with it later, but she struggles with this fact of like, oh, I guess I'm very easy to replace if I die or if I go missing, right? That's, I don't have that experience, but like that can be something to struggle with of I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a survivor. And yet, within a couple of years, you found somebody else, that can be that can cause a lot of emotional damage, right? So yeah, it was actually really difficult finding a word for the second book because I wanted to use the same structure, but I was like, what word goes in that blank? And it took so much time to come to the word vindicated. And so that was a little harder. I think it's much easier to name the first book in a series, and then it's tough afterwards because then you're trying to stick with the pattern. And if you're not good at making patterns, that can be a struggle. So yeah.
Well, So tell me, Whitney. And so, what are your plans for the future? Are you planning to go to any event soon enough so people can, like, meet you?
Yes, I am going to several events here in Texas. June 14th, I'm going to, I'm trying to think because I'm going to two different cities. And I live in San Antonio, so I hope to go to more events in that area. But June 14th, I am going to Houston. I'll be going to an adult book fair called Booklit, and I'm gonna have to gonna have to double check on that. Sorry. And then the weekend of June 22nd, I will be in Dallas. I will actually be at a big event called Kiss and Tell. It's mostly for romance, romantasy books, and I will be going to another event nearby that will be another book fair. I personally love book fairs just because it's just a great opportunity to chat with other readers, especially ones who are looking to support local authors. It's much easier to talk about my books with those kind of folks. And so, yeah, I'll be in Houston and Dallas. We'll see about the rest of the year. I don't have any plans beyond June, mostly because I need to finish this book and then I will hopefully set up a book tour around that. I've lived in Utah and Texas, so I hope to visit bookstores in those states to do some promo for The Vindicated Queen.
You could try California. I mean, it's pretty close.
Yeah, I definitely need to. I have grown more accustomed to driving, doing road trips for my books. I would think for California, I may have to fly. That way, I have more time there instead of on the road. But that's a lot of driving. But yeah, I'm always looking at visiting local bookstores or local book events, establishing that community that way. And so I hope to be at those things. And I'm trying to think if people are interested, I will be participating more as a guest than a speaker, but Right Hive is a free online conference or event for authors, and I highly recommend it. It's especially it's spelled as Right Hive, like a beehive. So WRITEHIVE. I have spoken in the past, but yeah, this year I'll be more just as a fan. But it's great for networking, hearing from other authors, whether they're indie or traditionally published, and it's great for all levels, and I highly recommend that.
So, can you tell us in which platforms we could buy your books?
You can find my books on just about any platform wherever books are sold, but you can definitely find them on Amazon. And I also have an online shop if you like signed copies. That's the URL is shopwitandtravesty.com. I can can maybe spell it for you later and put it in the show notes. But that's like the best way you can support me is buying directly from me. My books are also available on bookshop.org. That's a great alternative to Amazon if you're looking for that. But I would say those are the biggest platforms where you can find my books.
So, do you want to share your social media so people can learn more from you?
Absolutely. So you can find me mostly on Instagram. My username is Whittuni, but I'm also on TikTok and Facebook. Those platforms I use the username Wit and Travesty. That is the name of Travis and I. We have a freelance editing business together. And so it's a play on our names. It's spelled WITANDTRAVESTY. Like spelling out loud is hard. But yeah, you can find us on TikTok and Facebook that way. Yeah, I like to post bookstore tours on TikTok especially. So if you're looking to learn more about bookstores in Utah or Texas or wherever else I'm traveling, that's a great place to go. I personally have a bookstore quest where I go in person to various bookstores across Texas and I introduce myself as an author. I've just found that that's a much easier way of making connections with booksellers, getting my books on the shelf. I was tired of being stuck in so many inboxes. And so I decided to go in person. And so, yeah, I'm on that quest of just visiting as many as I can. I, of course, introduce myself if the bookstore is a good fit. Sometimes they may have a niche that doesn't quite fit with me, but I still like to share about my experiences. That way people can know more about bookstores that are in their town or just their state. So,
But
yeah,
it's rare that there's a bookstore that it's not your match. I mean, romantasy and and fantasy in general are like the most popular genres. So
I
usually,
would agree. Yeah.
yeah, so most bookstores are basically plastering them.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised. In my experience with visiting stores in Utah and Texas, I've come across bookstores that specialize in mystery, in poetry, children's books. I don't write for young, like picture book age children, and so there's that. One that comes to mind is called Haunt Happy Books, and they only do thrillers and horror. Again, those are not my forte, but I think it's interesting
Honestly,
how there's so many
a,
blends. You can still find romance tied with horror, right?
a
Yeah.
store that it's full of that's actually sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect that in a place like Texas, but it's literally in a basement under a pizza shop, and so it's very spooky.
Hey, at least it matched the vibe.
Yes, yeah, they found the perfect place for that. And it's interesting just to see, like, they have a table that's Western mixed with horror, LGBTQI plus mixed with horror. Of course, they have one bookshelf that's just Stephen King, right? And so I think it's very fascinating just to see, yeah, you can fill a whole bookstore with just one genre. There's so much of like classics and as well as new releases. Trying to think if there's other niches or that I've come across. I've also met book collectors, and they usually specialize in nonfiction, like, like a first edition of someone's journal or historical text about how a town got settled, right? And like in Texas, it's called Texana, or it could be called Mexicana if it's talking about like Mexican history, like the history of how certain towns were developed or colonized, etc., right? Just the history of people moving through that space. And so, yeah, my books probably wouldn't fit there because, again, I'm talking about worlds that aren't real. Yeah, I think, and I look forward to finding more bookstores that have these niches as well. And you'll be surprised what is in your area as well. I have used a lot of social media as well as Google Maps to really figure out where all these bookstores
Yeah.
are.
Well, Whitney, I think that's enough for now. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for coming and for this conversation. There was really a lot to talk about. I think we even have enough for another episode if you want, maybe in 6 months after you're publishing for the next book.
yeah, I would love to come back and talk about Vindicated Queen for sure. And yeah, thank you so much. These
Me
questions were
too.
great, and I
Eh,
love talking about books with other authors.
So, oh, do you do translations?
I have not translated my books yet, but I think that would be really great someday, especially considering that my books aren't quite international yet, but I have had readers from all over the world enjoy, especially the Destiny Seeker series. So it'd be fun to have it in their language. That and audiobooks are steps that I'd like to take in the future.
That sounds great. It's great to know that you have already a lot of plans for the future. So
Yeah,
keep going. Really.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I will do that. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you
Well,
again for having me. This was so great, and yeah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. This was so fun.
well, everyone, this was another episode of Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. I hope this was inspiring to you, and see you later. Bye, Whitney. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. We learned quite a lot today, like how we need to take control over our dreams. Whitney's decision to self-publish after traditional routes pan out taught her that you don't need permission to pursue your goals, which is quite true. She proved that with research, dedication, and a clear plan can create endless opportunities. We also learned that community is important also for writers. Whitney expressed that other authors are not competition, but allies. Networking, supporting, and celebrating the success of fellow writers can inspire and motivate you to keep going. So it's always important to understand that you are not alone on this. And it's fine to build relationships with the community. And lastly, writing can be non-linear. Whitney described that for overcoming writer's block and burnout, Taking breaks and focusing on other aspects of your life, it's vital. Process isn't always steady, and allowing yourself to pause can lead to better ideas and a renowned passion. Well, thanks for coming and joining us today. If you find this episode inspiring, like, subscribe, and share this video. And give Markee Books a try in the link below. Have a nice day and see you next week. Bye.